January 2025, Netflix headquarters, Los Angeles. The streaming giant was throwing the biggest wrestling celebration in years. Monday Night Raw was officially moving to their platform. Legends filled the room. Stone Cold Steve Austin got thunderous applause. The Rock received a standing ovation. Then Hulk Hogan walked out, promoting his new American beer brand, expecting the hero's welcome he'd received for decades. Instead, he was met with boos. Loud, unrelenting boos that seemed to shake the entire venue. This wasn't just some isolated incident. This was 34 years of buried resentment finally exploding into the open, and nobody understood that better than The Undertaker, who was watching from backstage with a knowing look in his eyes. A few days later, on his 6 Feet Under podcast, Undertaker was asked the question everyone wanted answered. Did you feel bad for Hogan getting booed? His response was immediate and cold. No. Then he added something that sent shockwaves through the wrestling world. I have feelings for people, but sometimes in life things come back. What Undertaker said next would reveal the dark truth about Hulk Hogan that fans had never heard, a truth that went back to November 27, 1991, and one of the most manipulative moments in wrestling history. But to understand why The Undertaker felt no sympathy for Hogan's public humiliation, you have to go back to that night at Survivor Series, when a 24-year-old Mark Calloway was about to win his first WWE Championship by defeating the biggest star in the business. The Undertaker was still new to the WWF, barely a year into his career, but Vince McMahon had seen something special in the young giant from Texas. That night, he was booked to do the unthinkable, meet Hulk Hogan and become champion. Backstage, just minutes before their match, Hogan pulled Undertaker aside. The conversation that followed would haunt Taker for the next 3 decades. "Brother," Hogan said, his voice filled with concern, "my neck's been bothering me lately. I'm nervous about taking that Tombstone Piledriver of yours." Undertaker, still earning his stripes and desperate to prove himself, looked Hogan straight in the eye. "Hulk, believe me. I'll protect you. I pride myself on not hurting people. You have nothing to worry about." What happened next was wrestling history. The match began with 15,000 fans on their feet. Ric Flair interfered on Hogan's behalf, but it backfired. Undertaker grabbed Hogan, lifted him up, and delivered his signature Tombstone Piledriver. The crowd held their breath as Undertaker made the cover. 1, 2, 3. The Undertaker was the new WWF champion. The crowd erupted. It should have been the greatest moment of his young career. But the second Undertaker dropped to his knees to deliver that tombstone, he heard Hogan whisper something that would change everything. "You got me, brother." At first, Undertaker thought Hogan was just acknowledging the finish. But then Hogan began selling the move, like he was seriously injured. He laid there motionless, not responding to the referee, acting like something had gone horribly wrong. The arena turned into chaos. EMTs rushed to the ring. Hogan, still laying on the mat, asked them to call his wife Linda. The crowd, sensing something was genuinely wrong, fell silent. Backstage, Undertaker was devastated. He thought he had just ended Hulk Hogan's career on the biggest night of his own life. "I was mortified," Undertaker would later reveal. "I thought I had blown the biggest opportunity of my life. Here I am, this young guy, and I think I just seriously hurt the biggest star in the company." For days, Undertaker couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the move in his mind, wondering what he had done wrong. The guilt was eating him alive. But then, something strange started happening. Wrestlers backstage began reviewing the tape of the match. What they saw changed everything. Hogan's head never came close to the mat. The Tombstone Piledriver was executed perfectly. Shane McMahon, who was working in the production truck that night, confirmed it. The move was completely safe. Hogan wasn't hurt at all. Armed with this knowledge, Undertaker decided to confront Hogan directly. He found him backstage at the next event and asked the question that had been burning inside him. Man to man, what happened out there? Hogan's response revealed everything Undertaker needed to know about who he really was. "Well, brother," Hogan said without a hint of remorse, "you had me so tight I couldn't move. That's what jammed my neck." No apology. No acknowledgement that his actions had put Undertaker through hell. No recognition that he had damaged a young wrestler's confidence and reputation. Just an excuse that blamed Undertaker for Hogan's own deception. In that moment, Undertaker saw right through the act. At that point, he said years later, "I knew what he was all about." What Hogan had done wasn't just faking an injury. He had used Undertaker's professionalism and concern against him. He had manipulated a young wrestler's genuine desire to protect his opponent and turned it into a weapon of psychological warfare. But why? Why would the biggest star in wrestling need to play these mind games with a rookie? The answer was simple: control. Even in losing, Hogan found a way to make himself the center of attention. By faking the injury, he ensured that the focus would be on him, not on Undertaker's historic victory. It was a master class in manipulation disguised as an accident. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about a pattern of behavior that would define Hogan's entire career. For the next 30 years, wrestlers who worked with Hogan would tell similar stories of manipulation, politics, and calculated moves designed to protect his position at the expense of others. Jesse "the Body" Ventura learned this the hard way when he tried to organize a wrestlers' union in the 1980s. Just when it seemed like the wrestlers might gain some power, someone leaked Jesse's efforts to Vince McMahon. Years later, under oath during a lawsuit, McMahon revealed who the snitch was: Hulk Hogan. Hogan hadn't just betrayed a friend, he had sabotaged an entire generation of wrestlers who were fighting for basic rights and fair treatment. And he did it to protect his own position at the top. The pattern continued when Hogan jumped to WCW in 1994. His contract included something almost unheard of in wrestling: creative control. This meant that if Hogan didn't like a storyline, a match finish, or the way he was being presented, he could simply refuse to do it. He used this power constantly. Young talent like Diamond Dallas Page and Booker T found themselves stuck in neutral while Hogan monopolized the spotlight. Even when he did agree to lose matches, they came with interference, distractions, and chaotic finishes that protected his image. The most infamous example came at Starrcade, 1997. Sting had been built up for over a year as WCW's answer to Hogan's villainous Hollywood character. The finish was carefully planned. The referee would deliver a fast count, Bret Hart would intervene to restart the match, and Sting would win clean. But Hogan made sure the count wasn't fast. The crowd was confused. Sting's victory felt hollow. Even in losing, Hogan had manipulated the moment to protect himself. This behavior reached its breaking point at Bash at the Beach 2000. When Hogan refused to lose to Jeff Jarrett as planned, WCW's head writer Vince Russo went nuclear. He sent Jarrett out to literally lay down in the ring, allowing Hogan to pin him in the most awkward moment in wrestling history. What happened next was pure chaos. Russo came back out and cut a scathing, unscripted promo calling Hogan out for hijacking WCW with his backstage politics. The damage was done. WCW's locker room was divided, and the company never recovered. The same pattern repeated when Hogan joined TNA in 2010. The company had been building around young stars like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, and Christopher Daniels. But almost overnight, the focus shifted to Hogan and his aging crew. Young talent was pushed aside. Fresh storylines were replaced with rehashed conflicts from the 1990s. Even TNA's signature six-sided ring was scrapped simply because Hogan didn't like it. To fans and wrestlers, that ring wasn't just a gimmick, it represented innovation and creativity. But Hogan's comfort mattered more than the company's unique identity. Bobby Roode, who should have won the TNA World Championship at Bound for Glory 2011, saw his moment stolen when Hogan reportedly said backstage that Roode wasn't ready. Instead, they gave the win to Kurt Angle, another established star in Hogan's circle. This is why The Undertaker felt no sympathy when Hogan was booed at that Netflix event. This is why wrestlers like Scott Steiner called Hogan a cancer in WCW. This is why CM Punk described the atmosphere around Hogan as cold and unwelcoming. For over 3 decades, Hogan had built his legacy on the backs of younger wrestlers, manipulating situations to protect his spot while stunting the growth of others. The Netflix crowd wasn't just booing a racist tape scandal, they were booing 34 years of selfish behavior that had hurt the business they loved. As Undertaker put it on his podcast, Hogan was acting like nothing ever happened. Smiling, shaking hands, pushing his beer, he was no-selling it. In wrestling terminology, no-selling means pretending something didn't hurt when it did, but coming from The Undertaker, it carried a deeper meaning. Hogan was no-selling the consequences of his own actions, pretending that decades of backstage manipulation and betrayal could simply be ignored. But the wrestling world has a long memory. And sometimes, as Undertaker said, things come back. The young wrestler who was manipulated in 1991 had become the most respected man in the business. The Undertaker's reputation was built on loyalty, professionalism, and putting the business first. He never forgot the lesson Hogan taught him about who to trust and who to keep at arm's length. That's why when the Netflix crowd booed Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker wasn't surprised. He had seen this coming for over 30 years. The bill for Hogan's behavior had finally come due, and the dead man wasn't about to feel sorry for a man who had never shown remorse for his actions. In the end, Hulk Hogan got exactly what he had spent his career giving others: no sympathy, no excuses, and no way to manipulate his way out of the consequences. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the real story. For decades, Hogan had been the master of rewriting narratives to suit his needs. He had convinced an entire generation of fans that he was the ultimate good guy, the American hero who stood for everything pure and noble in professional wrestling. But in locker rooms across the country, a different story was being told. Veterans would pull younger wrestlers aside and warn them about Hogan's methods. They'd explain how he operated, how he would smile to your face while calculating ways to undermine you behind your back. Mick Foley, one of the most respected figures in wrestling history, once shared his own experience with Hogan during their brief time together in WCW. He described feeling like Hogan was never truly present in their conversations, always looking past him for someone more important, someone who could do more for his career. There was this sense that you were either useful to him or you weren't, Foley later recalled, and if you weren't useful, you became invisible pretty quickly. This behavior created a toxic environment that extended far beyond individual relationships. When the top star of a company operates with such calculating self-interest, it sends a message to everyone else about what success really requires. Young wrestlers learned that politics mattered more than talent, that manipulation was more valuable than dedication. The psychological impact on The Undertaker from that 1991 incident ran deeper than anyone realized at the time. Here was a young man who had built his entire identity around honor, loyalty, and protecting others. His character, his work ethic, everything about him was authentic. Then he encountered Hogan's manufactured crisis and realized how easily sincerity could be weaponized against him. I learned more about this business in those 5 minutes after our match than I had in my entire career up to that point. Undertaker would reflect years later. I learned that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Not everyone who shakes your hand has good intentions. That lesson shaped how Undertaker approached the rest of his career. He became intensely selective about who he trusted, incredibly protective of younger wrestlers who reminded him of his former self, and absolutely ruthless toward anyone who tried to play political games at others' expense. It's why wrestlers like Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and John Cena speak about Undertaker with such reverence. They know that earning his respect means something because it can't be bought, manipulated, or faked. You have to earn it through consistent professionalism and genuine concern for the business. When Undertaker became the unofficial locker room leader in WWE, one of his unwritten rules was simple: anyone caught playing the kind of backstage politics that Hogan had mastered would find themselves facing the dead man's disapproval. And in WWE's hierarchy, that was often a career-ending position. The 2025 Netflix incident represented more than just a moment of public embarrassment for Hogan. It was the wrestling community's collective memory finally expressing itself. Every boo in that room represented a story, a betrayal, a missed opportunity that could be traced back to Hogan's self-serving behavior. Consider the ripple effects of just that one incident in 1991. If Hogan hadn't manipulated the situation, Undertaker might have felt more confident in his early title reign. He might have developed differently as a performer. Other young wrestlers watching backstage might have felt more secure in their own positions. Instead, they all learned the same lesson: even your biggest moments can be undermined by someone with more power and fewer scruples. That paranoia, that constant looking over your shoulder, became part of wrestling culture for an entire generation. The most tragic aspect of Hogan's behavior was how unnecessary it was. He was already the biggest star in wrestling. His position was secure. His legacy was established. But his need to control every narrative, to manipulate every situation, revealed something deeper than mere ego. Fear that someone else might get over. Fear that the audience might embrace a new hero. Fear that his carefully constructed image might crack if he wasn't constantly managing it. That fear drove him to make decisions that ultimately damaged not just individual careers, but the entire industry. The wrestling business has always been political, but Hogan elevated backstage manipulation to an art form. He didn't just politic for himself. He created systems that ensured his continued dominance while making it nearly impossible for others to rise organically. This is why The Undertaker's lack of sympathy at the Netflix event felt so justified to those who knew the real story. It wasn't cruelty or jealousy. It was the natural consequence of treating people as disposable assets in service of your own ambitions. For 3 decades, Hogan had been protected by his status as a mainstream icon. His crossover success in Hollywood, his reality TV shows, his carefully managed public image, all of it created a buffer between him and the consequences of his wrestling world behavior. But wrestling fans have long memories, and they had been waiting for this moment. The Netflix boos weren't spontaneous. They were the culmination of years of suppressed frustration from people who knew the real story, but had never had a platform to express it. The Undertaker's podcast comments gave voice to that frustration. When one of the most respected figures in wrestling history publicly states that Hogan deserved his humiliation, it validates the experiences of everyone who had been manipulated, undermined, or betrayed by Hogan over the years.